to our session on the future of media innovation on the edge. Research for the National Association of Broadcasters pilot and Verizon Media, conducted by Carney. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a partner and America's media lead for Carney, a global management consulting firm, and I was the lead researcher on this engagement. I'm joined today by Jason from Verizon Media. Jason, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi. Hey, everyone. Thanks, Mike. I'm Jason Friedlander from Verizon Media. I am the Senior Director of Product Marketing, responsible for our media platform, which includes our streaming, delivery, security, and compute products.
Thank you, Jason. We'd like to share what we believe is a very insightful and a unique research report on the future of edge computing for broadcasting. To give you a sense of where we're coming from, Pilot, in partnership with Verizon Media, commissioned Carney to interview a number of broadcasting executives about edge computing, how they saw the evolution of edge in the industry, and how their companies could potentially use edge to advance their strategic agendas. We spoke with a diverse set of executives working both in TV and radio, in large and small companies, to gather a broad range of perspectives on edge. And this was done by design, because as we go through the research, you'll see there are some differences depending on which sector of broadcasting that you focus on and how your company is positioned in that sector. There are several key questions that we try to aim to understand for broadcasters. I'm not going to drain the entire list here, but to give you a sense of the types of questions that we asked each executive, they included: what does edge mean to media and entertainment companies? How do those companies plan to use edge technology? Is edge seen as a cost savings opportunity, a revenue opportunity, or could it be a bit of both? What are some of the main drivers for adopting edge, and what are some of the roadblocks? How will the broadcasters use edge and develop edge capabilities and technologies? Will they do it themselves or work with external third parties? And where will edge technologies go in the future? Just to name a few of the key questions that we wanted to solve for. We got very insightful responses from many of the executives that we talked to. One of the key things, though, that we started with is defining what edge computing means for broadcasting. When you think about edge computing, and if you look at the Gartner definition, it's part of a distributed computing topology where processing is located close to the edge. But when we talked to our respondents, they saw edge applied to their businesses, that processing that occurs at the tail end of the network, but some also saw it applied at the device themselves. So we unified around what we heard from the industry to come up with our own definition of edge for broadcasting. Our definition being that edge is defined as data and compute processing at the tail end of the broadcaster's IP-based networks, including next generation terrestrial, or ATSC 3.0, and digital, with processing on the devices themselves for select applications. So this was a unique definition that we created specifically for the broadcasting industry that took into account how edge is utilized today and how edge could be utilized tomorrow as networks and devices continue to evolve and become more enhanced in the future.
I think this was one of the most important things to come out of this report, really, from us. And that was what we wanted to understand when we were talking to NAB Pilot and us as Verizon Media, who, is responsible for some of the infrastructure that's going to be used in these edge solutions, is what does it mean to the customers that we work with on a daily basis. And I think you nailed it when you said in the definition that sometimes on the device, because I think the way enterprises, whether you're a broadcaster or e-commerce or whatever, have been hearing about edge computing. It's in the talks of 5G and multi-access edge compute on the wireless side, right? But unless you're really talking life and death situations, remote surgeries and things like that, most broadcasters are not going to need to operate there. And they're going to be able to operate, like you said, on the edge of their IP network or their partner's IP network. And I think, it was great to really summarize that and tie that together and kind of put a line in the sand of when we're talking broadcasting and talking edge, this is what it means.
No, thank you for that, Jason. It was interesting because even as part of the research, we got a lot of definitions of edge, and to finally have a starting point for this definition that the industry can rally around is going to be important to driving the adoption of this technology. So thank you for that. When we think about edge, there are several factors that are really starting to lay this groundwork that we believe will drive the adoption of edge in the future. The first being ATSC3. And we know that's more focused on television broadcasters, but we believe that some of the game-changing aspects of ATSC3, the fact that it's a hybrid technology that combines over-the-air with broadband, will give broadcasters more tools to deliver even more capacity and distribute broadcast video streams on mobile devices and tablets. And edge computing becomes even more of an important part of that equation. We also believe that continued cord cutting is another factor that will drive the adoption of edge. When you think about these consumer shifts that we're seeing from linear TV, pay TV, broadcast, and satellite in favor of digital and streaming to consume content, we believe that those shifts will make it more important for broadcasters to be able to deliver content reliably and responsively, and at the same time extract more insights from consumers as they engage with that content on multiple devices and form factors. We believe that IoT adoption continues to extend this. And as you think about the world of IoT and all the devices and endpoints that could potentially be in scope in the future, we believe that edge only allows broadcasters to address those endpoints in a systematic fashion and be able to actually support those endpoints, whether it's smart speakers or new types of screens or new types of 5G enabled devices.
Yeah, I think, Mike, when you talk about that stuff, I mean, it's a mind change for broadcasters from, decades of one-to-many delivery, whether it's, over the air or through a cable network or now to their OTT application, to really being able to deliver directly, knowing what the device is, where that device is located, and it becomes, a real one-to-one relationship. And when you're talking local news, local radio, that's a real important game changer for these companies.
Yeah, and I think, Jason, that's exactly right. And I think this is the type of bold proposition that broadcasters should be considering as they continue to evolve their strategies. And as frankly, as the competition for the consumer, gets more intense, you're going to have capabilities that allow you to do things differently and know even more about your audiences than ever before. And to that point, increased audience interactivity is another driver. If you think about the broadcasting industry, has traditionally been more of a one-way, a one-to-many relationship with the audience in terms of how content's delivered. We're going to see that move more towards two-way communications. And the consumer is basically going to be looking for more information at their fingertips, and they're going to want more answers instantaneously. And Edge allows broadcasters to begin to support that request. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to the top and bottom line. And we believe that Edge will play a distinct role in enhancing both top and bottom line. When you start thinking about some of the use cases that could drive revenue growth or other use cases that drive cost savings and operational efficiency. As we spoke with the set of broadcast executives, there were 5 insights that emerged through the research. The first being that expectations for Edge amongst broadcasters are high. When you look at what broadcasters are thinking about Edge, they're really looking at it to be this game-changing technology that Jason alluded to earlier. Secondly, the benefits from these innovations and use cases will be primarily in the form of revenue growth with some cost savings. That was an interesting insight in itself. We'll show you some data around that. The third insight is Edge is in a very nascent stage in the broadcasting industry today, but is poised for explosive growth in the not too distant future. And all of the executives that we talked to were aligned on the time frame by which Edge becomes very relevant to the broadcasting industry.
That was one that was interesting to me, right? Like, one of the things that NAB and Verizon Media, when we went into this, we were hoping or expecting to have a lot of the broadcasters come back to us with, oh, we're already expecting to do this. Can we do that today? And to really hear them, talk about it in the future tense, near future, but future tense was really interesting.
I agree. The fourth insight is that broadcasters will collaborate and rely on experienced third parties to handle more of the capability development for Edge. So broadcasters in some cases may do some things themselves, but we heard loud and clear that they're going to lean on partners for expertise and capabilities as they move forward with Edge. And the last insight is Edge will play out differently across TV versus radio broadcasters because of the inherent differences between the two industry subsectors. So we'll talk about those differences later in the presentation. One of the first questions that we asked our industry participants is the degree of impact that Edge will have on the broadcasting industry. And the consensus was that Edge technologies will have an above average impact. As you can see by the chart here, the vast majority of TV and radio executives that we spoke to thought that above average impact was going to be the place that Edge landed. We did have a few that felt it would be average and some that also felt it would have a high impact. We actually had one executive from radio that felt Edge would have no impact. But by and large, the Edge technologies are expected to have a major impact on the broadcasting industries.
Mike, when you guys did the research and you talked to these companies, obviously without naming names, were you able to see based on their current use of technology and where they are in advancing how they answered this question, right? Like more advanced companies obviously believe it would be more above average, or was it across the board?
It's a great question, Jason. I would say the answer is actually across the board. We actually had companies that had not embarked on Edge in any way, shape, or form today, and even admitted that they may not be able to make the investment in the near term or will require partners or consortium approaches to get there. But they still felt that Edge was going to have that impact that was going to change the industry. We also saw that broadcasters believe that Edge will drive innovation across the entire ecosystem. So when you start to begin to look at the end-to-end value chain of broadcasting, from content creation all the way through measurement engagement, there were opportunities that came out of the discussions with the broadcasting executives. As you can see, within production, there's everything from being more agile with news gathering, all the way to rethinking how you do sports and live entertainment workflows and automation and programming. You can do everything from geo-targeting to interest-based content. A lot of benefits and opportunities were identified in advertising around location-based services and how you start to change the storytelling in advertising campaigns. On content and delivery, we saw a number of applications for Edge going forward, and a lot in the broadcast operations space around, for example, in remote monitoring, control, and broadcast stream stitching. In consumption and experience, this is where Edge really shines, is because you can combine that network-based application of Edge with device-based applications as well to get into quick response applications with consumers, as well as device-level processing. These all enhance your experience elements such as personalization and user curation and multi-screen interactivity. And then on measurement, this is obviously a topic that the industry has been focused on for many years. They saw Edge as a way to begin to think about that differently and get even more insights and almost census level capabilities around measurement.
Yeah, I would love to run through each of these. This is the world I live in every day. And, if I can run through real quick and give you some real world examples of things that I think we could do today or, in the near future. And one of the benefits I think that, NAB members have 100% is that most of them operate within a local community, right? Or they have their affiliates in a local community. And that's something that a technology company can't do really, right? They require, users to give that input. But when you're operating within a community, you have a base of knowledge on what the needs of that community are above and beyond anything else, right? And you can really start to do those things now where it wasn't cost effective to be, block by block or, neighborhood by neighborhood, because you were broadcasting one to many, or the broadcast equipment didn't allow you to stitch things together on the edge to offer a better experience to people in specific neighborhoods. You now have that opportunity, which is really great. So if you look at production, one of the great things is you send a remote truck out and has to upload. The remote truck has to go up. You can now use the edge as an ingest mechanism, right? You can use the infrastructure that already exists, in points of presence throughout the nation, already foundations laid by other companies and other partners that you would work with, to go ahead and ingest your content that way, right? That's a super simple one, easy way to get back to your production rooms, back to your editing bays, whatever you need, and do a lot of that stuff in the cloud. When you talk about programming, that's where I think it really gets exciting, right? You no longer need the broadcast infrastructure to generate, or I always like to say, experiment with new content delivery use cases for the end user, right? You can now take your local news, for instance, and on a per user basis, you can have your local news broken up by story with the anchors talking in between, and you could remix that on the fly for each user to determine what their likes are. If they like entertainment or sports, put that up front, put local next, right? And you could do that without any costs, really, because you're delivering to the end user. And if they're watching, you start generating revenue. I think that's a really exciting thing. You can even talk about it when I talk on the neighborhood level. I live in Los Angeles, right? And Los Angeles has 5 different climates, from the ocean to the valley to the high desert to the mountains. But we always get the news report always has to give it in that huge chunk. Here's the climate, here's the weather for all of this. But on the edge now, you can stitch in my local for where I live news report on the fly when I go and watch, right? And you're now giving me this experience I can't get anywhere else. I can't get it over the air. It's just impossible, right? And it makes me have more brand loyalty to the broadcaster or the radio station that I'm listening to. And I think that's really cool. From a delivery perspective, this is the most obvious one, right? When you get to things on the edge, you're closer to the end user, the edge becomes more powerful. You can deliver better quality through your partners, right? You can make sure that end user is as close as possible to the content, so they don't have to wait for what we call larger chunks, bigger video files, bigger audio files to get to their phone and deal with latency. They can get that right away, and they can get a great quality. And then on consumption, you nailed it. It's about the advertising, it's about the quality, it's about the experience. And again, if you work with a great partner, you can intermix all these things and try these things out without a big infrastructure overhaul, right? And you can work in the transition you just made for ATSC 3.0, and you can start to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And I think that's where it's going to be really, really exciting. These broadcasters can become the app companies of tomorrow and offer, these localized experiences that have been, people have been trying to do, to some success, but I think there's going to be a real honest success moving forward.
So Jason, if I'm hearing you correctly, these are pretty monumental use cases. And what I'm hearing from you is that despite this being a very nascent technology, this is not that far-fetched. This is stuff that could actually be deployed almost immediately. Is that correct? Or I just want to make sure we understand how real are some of these things as for broadcasters to consider.
Yeah, I think the known things that I kind of just talked about, I think are all very doable, right? It's really, companies like Verizon Media and other companies in our space finding partners in the broadcast space to experiment and work to figure that out. And of course, there are some, forward-leaning tech enabled broadcasting companies out there that are doing a lot of these things already, and they're trying to figure out how to play the edge in there, whether it's as simple as image manipulation on the fly, or whether it's as simple as manifest manipulation on the edge to stitch hyper-local advertising into the feed. But it's that mix of all these things that I think we've yet to see. All these things that do exist today within the technology realm, but no one's put it together in that experience to say, this is why the edge really helps. And this is the benefits we get from the edge, because I've seen uptick because it's more local. I'm able to, show, I know this person's a Dodger fan versus a Los Angeles Angels fan versus a Charger versus a Rams, and give them the experience they want. Does that enable people to watch longer? And as we all know, if they're watching longer, I'm serving more ads and I'm able to really, monetize this. So when you go back to what you said a few slides ago between, is it a revenue opportunity or a cost savings opportunity? It really is both. And, you do have to be willing to put the manpower in to experiment and figure out what works and find the things that work for you and your brand and your affiliates or your radio station or your broadcasting company.
No, thank you for clarifying that. The last thing I'll say about this topic here is that, as you can see at the bottom, there's this underlying layer of analytics that we believe is critical end to end that ties all of these parts of the ecosystem together, as well as is a key component of edge technology. So this is something else as you think about your future edge strategies. How do I bring these together? And then how do I actually have the analytics to actually understand how to utilize them in the proper form so I get the most value from them as a broadcaster?
Yeah, it's funny. It's still like, even for broadcasters, it's still going to be a challenge to a certain extent when you talk about PII and all that kind of stuff, right? Most of these broadcasters operate and don't really require their users to log in to watch the news or watch whatever, or authenticate. So how do I, the benefit is I can now know who that user is, but how do I let the user know to trust me, to give me their information, and so I can make their experience better? And I think actually broadcasters do play a really kind of, they pull on your heartstrings a little bit, right? You grew up watching Channel 4 because your parents watched Channel 4, right? So there may be that opportunity to use that kind of brand loyalty to say, hey, you've trusted us for your news. You've trusted us to be your voice of your neighborhood, your voice of your city for this many years. Trust us to offer you an even better version of that experience moving forward. But that is going to be an interesting challenge, is how do I deliver to this person? And also I want to now know exactly who this person is, which I've never really been able to know before.
A huge paradigm shift for broadcasters.
Right, yeah.
One of the questions that we wanted to understand was Edge's potential financial impact to the broadcasting industry. And as we spoke to the executives, it came out loud and clear that many of them thought that the benefit was primarily new revenue with some cost savings. This was interesting for us as researchers because we actually thought that Edge might have been viewed as a lot of technology initiatives are thought of as more of a cost savings or an efficiency play. But as you can see, the majority of respondents think it's actually about new revenue, new offerings, new business models. And you can see, while there are some that do think about cost savings or even an equal split between cost and revenue, the majority from a TV broadcast side are at least aligned on the revenue line. Radio was actually more distributed. As you can see, when you think about radio broadcasters, they were equally distributed between cost savings, equal distribution of revenue and cost savings, or new revenue generation. So quite interesting views as to the financial impact that Edge could drive.
Yeah, and I think, broadcasters, whether you're radio or TV, just have to go into it with the understanding of there will be a cost to doing these things, right? Because you're going to be experimenting with new things on the edge. But when you think about it from a cost savings perspective, you have to think about, how would I have done this previously? Or how would I have done this? Or was it even possible before? And if the answer to that is it would have cost this much or it wasn't, then you got to think about, what the actual cost of doing it is and the new revenue you're going to bring in, versus you're not just going to save money, right? There is going to be an offset in there somehow between, getting your new products and services and new features and stuff out there. And then the revenue that's going to come in associated with it that you couldn't have done before.
Exactly. We wanted to think about where Edge could potentially have a positive influence when you start thinking about the different parts of a broadcasting business. And we really boiled it down to 4 major areas. The vast consensus of executives that we talked to thought that Edge could have major impact and influence on the advertising business. from enhanced targeting to being able to deliver ads in the right place at the right time. So really rethinking how you do campaigns, especially multi-platform campaigns, and increase CPMs and pricing. They also saw a lot of benefit in the production side of it as well. So when you think about how you begin to do the workflows around sports production, how you actually augment and simplify the work that needs to be done to produce a show or a live sports event, or getting broadcasters closer to the cloud in terms of using the cloud supply chain or remote production. This was another area that they saw Edge as being highly relevant for. They also saw it in programming, and it gets back to some of the things we talked about earlier around greater personalization, more interactivity, and even starting to leverage the second screen in a much more useful way. And from a broadcast ops perspective, a lot of I would say the expected things came out of that: reducing latency, streamlining operations, and moving to different types of models that were more efficient and productive, such as agile news gathering, smaller facilities, etc.
Yeah, I think you can look as at the Edge as, from this perspective, as the front door, the gateway to all of this stuff, right? You can now ingest your content directly to the cloud within your locality or within your nearest region, right? And I think that is going to be a super advantageous thing for broadcasters to take advantage of. I
agree. We wanted to understand the awareness of Edge amongst broadcasters. And what was quite interesting is the distribution and how that distribution relates between television broadcasters and radio broadcasters. So we know this is a very nascent technology as you think about the broadcasting industry. And the vast majority of the respondents said that they were moderately aware of Edge. Again, when you look at television, there's a general sense of awareness across the board. Some would say they're more or less aware than others, but they're generally aware. When you look at radio, it kind of goes from being aware all the way to being unaware. And actually, as you can see within radio, there were a number of respondents that felt that their executives were not aware of Edge at all. And this is something that the industry is going to have to work on, is really building this awareness so that ultimately you can leverage this technology to take advantage of some of the use cases that we laid out earlier, I should say, that are really kind of differentiating for broadcast when you can do those things.
Yeah, give me a Pandora radio station with local announcers, local news, local highlights, local, all that stuff. Everything now is so nationalized or globalized. It's, I don't get any of that. And when Spotify attempts to do something like that, even the news that they're stitching in at the beginning of my morning feed is still national news, right? And I think there's, again, going back to, that nostalgia piece, there's something about having that voice of my community, the voice of my city, talking to me and introducing me to new music or introducing me to new shows or new experiences that, can be brought back to a new generation. And I think that could be exciting.
We also asked a question on when do you believe that Edge will be adopted? And this is one of the answers where we saw a universal consensus for the most part, 3 to 4 years, which is not that far out. And one of the interesting things that kind of came out of this is right now, if you think about broadcasters right now in television in particular, and I would say for radio as well, they're undergoing a transformation now with 3.0 deployments, moving to digital audio for the broadcaster, the radio broadcasters. Edge will have its place in that line, and it's not far away. So 3 to 4 years is really when we expect to see this technology really take hold. We did have one outlier, a radio broadcasters that thought it was going to be 5+ years. But for the most part, 3 to 4 years was the consensus in terms of a time frame to adoption. We also covered what we believed would be potential challenges and roadblocks to this adoption. And really there were 4 big buckets of challenges that we identify. One is broadcasting's legacy over-the-air broadcast architecture. And we know this is being addressed either through next generation broadcasting or for TV, or as we think about radio, just this move to digital or to audio. We believe that as those movements continue to happen, those barriers will continue to be lowered. That still, broadcasters are going to need to find an economic and service model that allows them to operationalize this multicast with return path capability, and Edge is going to be key to that monetization, we believe. Privacy and security. Jason alluded to this earlier. Consumers may limit the types of data that they're willing to share with broadcasters, but more importantly, broadcasters, as they become entrusted with this data, are going to need to establish the protocols internally to make sure that they manage that data and keep it safe so that trust is not broken. Government regulation is another one. And this is an interesting one because we see that broadcasters are going to really need to utilize their spectrum to the fullest extent, and Edge gives them a way to do that. So we want to make sure that broadcast stays at the forefront of the industry and utilizes all of its assets, including its spectrum and Edge and the networks associated with that, to the fullest. The last is really around money and investment capacity. And we talked to a diversity of companies. And again, they all were in different levels of financial performance and investment capacity. And this is going to be something else that is going to be a factor in terms of how quickly Edge is adopted. Can they invest? Is the business case there for investment? Will there be vehicles such as consortiums for smaller broadcasters to band together to get a kind of an aligned approach on moving this in the marketplace? And that also involves the ecosystem partners as well, who could also help with some of the investment and make it more affordable for broadcasters to enter the space.
Yeah, I would say don't try to reinvent the wheel when it comes to this space, right? Like, there's major advantages in working with partners and other companies in your space, other broadcasters, to get what you want done and have it rolled out. The worst thing, the biggest thing that happens in this industry over the years is just the lack of a spec, right? The lack of agreement of what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and everyone tries to accomplish it differently. So if we can all work together, use the NAB exactly for this purpose, to identify, common ways to work with the Edge, or whether it's the data or whatever, it would just be advantageous to everybody.
I agree. One of the most interesting things that we found was really how broadcasters were thinking about the deployment and the capability build around Edge. So as you look across that ecosystem or value chain for broadcasters, we saw two distinct patterns. One where broadcasters thought they would take a heavier hand in building or developing those capabilities versus third parties. And if you look, really it's around kind of, I'll say, the upstream activities where broadcasters felt that they would probably do more themselves. And I would say not all broadcasters, but this is where we heard more consensus around broadcasters having a heavier hand in developing those capabilities, because they felt, for example, in content creation and targeted content, that these are areas where they could differentiate. These are areas where they could gain some competitive advantage. And so they would like to have a heavier hand in those. The second pattern was really around what we heard third parties being relevant for. And it was really around, I would say, the more downstream capabilities, starting from kind of the play out distribution all the way to the consumer, and then ultimately to measurement engagement. And there was a consensus that third parties could help jumpstart things like content delivery, analytics, AI, app development, and measurement. Again, this was not to say that certain broadcasters didn't think that, look, we can go a bit further downstream, or that they couldn't or could use certain third-party developers or capabilities providers more upstream. But we thought that it was quite interesting that this line was pretty clear across all of our interviews, from where they thought it's in-house to where they thought it would be more outsourced, or they lean on the third parties.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense to me. I mean, moving forward, and what we've seen over the last year or 2 years is that these broadcasters should own the content and user experience, right? They should own those experiences, and they don't need to be in the infrastructure business of, the IT, the internet infrastructure business, the edge infrastructure business, right? They can operate by owning the consumer and building products and services that they need while relying on partners to do the delivery, report back analytics, all these types of things. And I think that is a clear line that makes a lot of sense to me.
We also wanted to highlight some of the distinctions we saw in the answers, especially between television broadcasters and radio broadcasters. So when you look at television broadcasters, we found that they were much more aware of edge. If you think about them, they've been under the pressure of cord cutting acceleration, the rise of OTT platforms. This has driven what many to believe edge-like capability use, either if they're using edge for their own systems or even in some of the streaming service providers that they follow. TV broadcasters were also more bullish on a shorter adoption time frame or horizon. And again, they thought that ATSC 3.0 was going to be that driver of this. So they were very bullish on that. They felt that the television broadcast industry is going to adopt edge faster. They felt like some of the edge elements are already in use. So they described how in some cases we were already using edge with CDNs. So they felt that it was a very natural transition for them to embrace edge. And they also placed more weight on edge's ability to boost advertising revenue. So they saw a lot of revenue opportunity from edge. And given their business models today are rooted heavily in advertising, it makes sense. On the radio side, less connection of edge to their existing terrestrial business, but they did think there could be a boon as they shift more to digital audio in particular. And as they start doing more streaming, that's where edge becomes a very relevant capability. They also anticipate a slightly longer horizon to adopt it. One of the things that they're looking for is more radio specific use cases. They want to see more of the art of the possible as it relates to edge within a radio or audio environment. They do believe that they will adopt edge to capitalize on digital audio and new listener intelligence opportunities. So getting back to understanding how their listeners engage and how they can measure listeners better, the clear-cut use case for radio broadcasters there. And they also believe that edge will drive more cost savings with some boost in advertising revenue. So again, they saw edge as more a cost play than a revenue play, which was interesting. So as we begin to bring this all together, we really had three takeaways from all of this research. One, that broadcasters need to think about edge holistically when evaluating where to deploy it to maximize their benefits and ROI. So one of the things that we heard in some cases was very, I'll say, point solution oriented answers, where you can use edge for content creation or you can use it for experience. Our view is that you need to think about edge across the entire life cycle and define your strategy at that level and then figure out how to source for those capabilities as a second step. They also need to identify key third parties that can help develop solutions to realize the full value of edge. So as Jason and I have both alluded to, this is not a go at it alone thing necessarily. And while some broadcasters may be in a position to do that, you have to continuously ask yourself, are you going to develop something that's really going to get you ahead? Or are you better off leveraging, or as Jason said, not recreating the wheel to focus your time and effort on other things for your business? And so really getting to the key providers that can help you jumpstart and potentially even leapfrog in edge is going to be important. And then the last point is really this collaboration element, the ability of collaborating with other broadcasters to accelerate edge adoption and to standardize this so that the overall industry begins to rally around a unified view of what edge can look like. And this will serve everyone well if you do that, because all of your ecosystem partners as well as your stakeholders such as your advertisers and your audiences will be able to take advantage of edge to the fullest.
Yeah. I agree. And I would say, those last 2 points go obviously hand in hand. We've talked about it throughout the entire conversation, but whether it's you have a partner with Verizon Media or another one of the companies in this space, I would say the two things you should do after listening to us talk is, come up with ideas, brainstorm things you want to do, and call your partners and say, hey, can I do this? Because 9 times out of 10, the partner probably hasn't thought of the use case you're thinking of, or the other way around, you might not have thought of use cases that the partner's already working on and might have betas or POCs on, and they're looking for real world scenarios to test it in. So that collaboration has to exist. And, you can probably, like you said, leapfrog the competition if you talk to the right people and get out in front of it and just start trying things and experimenting.
So we hope that you found this research informative and it gives you the starting points for formulating your own strategies around edge computing and broadcasting. Jason, I thank you. We thank NAB Pilot for the opportunity to share our insights with this audience, and we'll take any questions that you may have at this time.